Good evening, and welcome once again. Tonight we set sail into one of the most dramatic chapters of the past, the Viking Age. Who were these people? Were they raiders and warriors, or merchants, explorers, and settlers? How did they manage to cross the open seas in their longships? And what compelled them to leave the fjords of Scandinavia for the shores of England, Ireland, France, and even distant North America? The Viking Age stretched across centuries, leaving behind sagas, treasures, battles, and myths that still shape our imagination today. We shall look at where they came from, how their lives were arranged, and what mark they left in Europe and beyond. It is a story of restless hunger for more, of survival and endless motion carried on the tides of the North Sea. Wherever you are listening, perhaps preparing for sleep or simply drawn by curiosity for history, I am glad you are here. So let us begin. Our tale opens in a land of stone and water. The long coasts of Norway are mountains plunging straight into the sea. Denmark is a land of green plains, broad beaches, and shallow bays. Sweden stretches eastward, a realm of forests without end and lakes that shine like mirrors. Winters are harsh, summers short and heavy with work. The soil is fertile only in patches, and every family must be clever and resourceful to survive on what nature provides. People live on scattered farms that gather into small villages along fjords and straits. Their houses are long and low, built of timber and turf. Roofs are darkened with smoke. At the center burns the fire, warming the hall and cooking the stew. At one end, family and guests sleep. At the other, in the bitterest cold, livestock is kept. Yet the hall is more than shelter. It is where feasts are held, bargains struck, and stories told late into the evening. A guest sees carved posts, woven hangings on the walls, and the gleam of brooches on women's chests. By the door stands a loom, where skilled hands turn wool and flax into cloaks and tunics strong enough to keep out the sea wind. Life moves with the seasons. In spring, the soil is plowed, and barley, rye, and oats are sown. Summer is for fishing, haymaking, trade, and short voyages along known coasts. Autumn brings slaughtering and smoking of meat. Winter is for mending tools, telling sagas, and laying plans. Cattle feed the family. Fish and seals hang in rows to dry. Honey sweetens food, and beer cools in the shade. People know which herbs to gather and which trees bend best into the ribs of a ship. They dye cloth with madder root and meadow plants, forge iron in small pit furnaces, turning bog ore into strips of metal. Society is seen at a glance, by the cut of a cloak, by the weight of a silver arm ring. At the bottom are thralls, slaves. Above them are freemen, owners of their own fields and boats, who have the right to speak in assembly. At the top stand jarls and chieftains, who hold lands and lead war bands. Laws live in memory, spoken by the law speaker. Disputes may lead to blood and vengeance, but more often are settled with gifts or fines. The people's assembly, the Thing, gathers on meadows or hills. Here trials are judged, oaths sworn, leaders chosen. Here too merchants trade, and strangers bring tidings from far-off shores. By the standards of their age, the Norse were cleanly. In their graves, combs of antler, tweezers, and ear spoons are found. Men kept their hair and beards neat. Women fastened their dresses with oval brooches linked with strands of bright beads. Saturday was a day for bathing, noted even by neighbors across the sea. Faith touched every act. Gods and spirits lived beside men. Odin guarded poets and kings. Thor upheld order and was the friend of farmers and sailors. Freyr and Njord gave calm seas and rich harvests. Sacrifices were made in groves and in halls, where feasts and offerings alike were shared. The dead were laid in mounds with their belongings, sometimes even in ships, as if promised a voyage to another world. Runestones kept names and deeds alive. Carvers struck messages into stone so they would outlast memory. Trade began before raids. Even before monasteries knew fear, Scandinavians carried goods from market to market. In Jutland, by the 8th century, the bustling port of Ribe was alive. Between the Baltic and the North Sea rose mighty Hedeby. In Norway, Kaupang thrived by a sheltered bay. Merchants brought amber from Baltic shores, furs from deep forests, walrus ivory from the far north, and swords whose steel had passed through many hands. In return, they gained salt, glass, wine, and coins. But all depended on ships.
The shipwright was no less important than the Jarl. He chose oak for the keel, bent planks, fastened them with rivets. He built the rudder, set the mast, and cut the sail from greasy wool that shed water. The vessel drew shallow and could sail both sea and river and be hauled ashore when need arose. On the prow, beast heads were fixed to frighten foes, removed for peaceful journeys. Seamanship was memory passed on. Elders taught the young to read clouds, to watch birds and whales when land was near. In summer they steered by the sun, by night by the stars. A skilled sailor carried his compass in his mind.
Politics in Scandinavia was a mosaic. Dozens of petty kingdoms rose and fell within a single lifetime. A strong leader gathered followers with gifts and fortune, but if a neighbor grew stronger or hunger pressed too hard, men shifted their loyalty. Marriages and the fostering of children tied clans together. Ambition pushed men outward. Younger sons without land looked to the sea. By the end of the 8th century, the North stood on the edge of change. Markets thrived, halls filled, ships slid down greased timbers into cold water. The old gods still received offerings, but new ideas stirred restless minds. They had the skill, the will, and the means. Only one question remained: where would the first blow fall? That summer dawned quiet. The North Sea lay like steel, faintly rippled. Beyond the shoals stretched a low island, Lindisfarne. At low tide it joined the mainland. At high tide it was cut off again. For a century and a half, monks had prayed here, copied books, taught boys their letters, and guarded the relics of St. Cuthbert. Their gospel shone with gold and color. But on that day they saw sails. Long, narrow ships bore toward the shore. Shields hung from their sides. On the prows, carved heads loomed. Upon the monks fell men in mail and leather, armed with spears, axes, and knives. They knew what to take: chalices, books, reliquaries, candlesticks, cloths, anything that could be turned into silver. Those who resisted fell. Those who fled across the sands were hunted. Captives were led away in chains. The news spread swiftly. Letters filled with horror were written in York and farther south. The strangers were called heathens, and men asked what divine punishment had descended upon them. None had been ready for this. Armies fought armies, kings fought kings, but men who rose from the sea and struck at the heart of holy places were a new terror. And this was only the beginning. Soon blows fell at Jarrow, in Scotland, in Ireland. Monasteries that had once sent out saints now burned. Yet even in ruin, the monks of Lindisfarne endured. They bound wounds, mended doors, and prayed on. They carried the cult of St. Cuthbert along many roads until they found him a new home. But that is another story. Tonight we remember instead the first bell silenced by the crash of axes, the first pattern of bare feet across wet sand, the first meeting of two worlds upon the edge of sea and land.
The chronicles speak of Recru Island, among the first shores where the Northmen set foot. Within a few decades, the Vikings knew the Irish coast as well as the local fishermen.
They had mapped the sandbars at the mouths of rivers, remembered which houses guarded relics and books bound in gold. The monastery at Bangor was plundered more than once. The hermitage upon the Skellig cliffs, too steep for most, proved no barrier to men who had climbed sea crags since childhood. Soon, entire fleets rode the tides far up the Boyne and the Liffey. In the year 837, two great forces of ships entered both rivers at once. Closing ranks with spear and shield, they pressed deep into the land, driving cattle, dragging captives, stripping churches of treasures, and then waiting for the ebb to bear them back to sea. Experience brought permanence. A crew wishing to return year after year needed secure ground. Gaelic scribes coined a new word, Longphort, the ship camp. In 841, the Vikings drove stakes into the soil and raised huts beside two sheltered anchorages. One lay at a dark pool on the bend of the Liffey, the other farther north at Lindisfarne. At first, they were no more than fenced harbors with rough shelters for watchmen. By winter, they were something greater. Trenches were dug, posts hammered, hearths lit. They bartered furs and amber for wine and grain when they could, and when they could not, they took by force. The camp at the dark pool would, in time, become Dublin, a city where merchants gathered from Norway, the Isles, Wales, and the Irish kingdoms. Here, captives driven from valleys were sold to masters who carried them overseas. Here, silver from the east passed hand to hand and was melted into arm rings stamped with weight and proud maker's marks. Not every Viking lord in Ireland grew old. The annals speak of a commander named Turgesius, who ruled deep inland but whom the High King Maelsik Nall captured and drowned in a lake in 845. The truth of the tale is uncertain, but the lesson is clear. Irish kings could gather strength, strike the fleets, and drive them from the rivers, as they did on the Boyne, the Liffey, and the Shannon. Yet the rivers and long coasts gave the strangers freedoms no inland chieftain could match. A beaten warband could slip away with the tide, and a fleet destroyed one year returned the next with more ships, more men, and often allies drawn from quarreling clans. Gradually, the outsiders ceased to be only outsiders. Norsemen took wives and concubines from Gaelic lineages. They learned the language. Their children bore two names and claimed two homelands. The sea, once a dividing wall, became a binding road. In the harbors of Dublin and Waterford, one might hear Norse and Gaelic voices mingling.
South and east, the same fate overtook the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. After their raids in Northumbria, Viking sails were sighted off Kent and along the Thames. In 835, the men of Wessex recorded a fleet at Sheppey, cutting through the island like a scythe through barley. In the years that followed, ships pressed up estuaries, testing the walls of towns. Southern kings could defeat them in open battle if they caught them. Sometimes they did. But a fleet, choosing its time and place, was a sly enemy. In 851, the chroniclers speak in awe of a great fleet, hundreds of ships sailing up the Thames, sacking Canterbury and London before meeting the kings of Wessex and their ealdormen in a battle that raged through a day and a night. It was a true victory, yet it brought no cure. Survivors carried tales of England's wealth back to the fjords, and the next summer, more came.
By the mid-9th century, Viking habits changed in England as they had in Ireland. They began to winter there, first on marsh islands like Thanet, living off the land nearby. Then they built shelters and pens, planning for more. A winter camp meant no return to Scandinavia. With spring, they were already poised to strike inland, following old Roman roads and river valleys. And wintering tempted permanence. A turf wall and a row of huts could turn into a village. A village with a harbor grew into a market. And a market drew traders, gossip, and maps. On the western shores of Scotland and its islands, the same pattern unfolded. The Norse seized farms in the Hebrides, married local women, and a new seafaring people was born, neither wholly Norse nor wholly Gaelic. Later ages would call them the Norse Gaels. From their island halls they crossed to Ireland and back, sometimes merchants, sometimes wolves, carrying stories and customs both ways. Place names shifted, soft Gaelic endings yielded to hard Norse ones. In graves, oval brooches and ring pins appeared as in Norway. On carved stones, longships took the place of crosses. Tactics mattered as much as courage. The drakkar was a lever that could move kingdoms. Its crew could drag the light hull onto a pebbled beach, hull it over rollers into a tidal stream no horse could cross. Its shallow draft carried it across shoals where heavy ships rounded. A square sail sped them with the wind. When it died, oars drove them onward. Each man kept the rhythm. Shields hung along the sides like scales. On shore, they were taken down and locked into a wall, a roof against arrows. The Vikings prized surprise, but did not rely on it alone. Their discipline was simple: loyalty to a leader, sealed by gifts and oaths, and the hunger for silver weighed on scales. Targets were chosen with care. Monasteries held portable wealth. A silver chalice could be carried aboard, melted into rings, divided as reward. Cattle were herded to the shore and ferried onto boats. Slaves were driven at spear point and sold in foreign ports. Fortified towns were left for later. A village with a church and a bell, not a war horn, was an easier prize. They kept their calendars in memory. They knew feast days when crowds gathered. They knew fair days. They knew the narrows of rivers, fit for ambush or retreat. The English and Irish were not helpless. Local lords gathered war bands. Sometimes they caught a landing party and cut them down to the last man. Sometimes a fleet was trapped by the tide and destroyed with spears and stones. In Ireland, kings raised forces against the Longphorts and burned them. Such victories the annals praised eagerly. Yet between the lines was another truth. The Vikings came back, year after year. The sea gave them choice, and gold, silver, and wine made the risk worthwhile.
By then, the pattern was plain. What had begun as swift raids on islands became heavy pressure on entire coasts. A crew that wintered began to think in years. A camp that grew into a market drew ships not only to smoke and flame, but also to trade. In the Irish Sea and northern England, the names of Viking kings entered the chronicles. Old kingdoms bent. Some broke and vanished from record. Others hardened in fire, learning to build fortifications that would be needed in the years to come. In the surviving abbeys, monks patched roofs and copied books onto scraped parchment. In the halls of kings, messengers hurried with oaths and gifts. In coastal taverns, men learned to watch the change of wind and count the cries of gulls. On river bends, watchmen stared at the tide, wondering if the next flood would carry strange sails. The rivers of the Frankish world reached deep inland, like fingers stretching to the heart of wealth. The Seine ran from the channel through gardens and fields toward the city destined to be king of cities. The Loire wound across half a country, past vineyards, monasteries, and old Roman towns. The Garonne flowed from the Bay of Biscay into the warm south. Where a road had a gate, a river had a mouth. The Northmen understood this swiftly. A longship that slipped past a bar could be at a market quay before the bell of the nearest church was rung.
The Carolingian realm that stood against them was both mighty and divided. Charlemagne died in 814. His sons struggled to hold all together. After him, grandsons quarreled and divided until in 843 the empire was split at Verdun. Now 3 kings ruled West, Middle, and East Francia. Each had counts and bishops. Each had proud vassals who served their own interests first. Along those cracks, the Northmen pressed. Rouen burned already in 841. 2 summers later, a fleet counted in dozens of ships rose again upon the Seine. Their leader, the Latin scribes, called Regin Harris. Later sagas wove his name into Ragnar. The name mattered less than the day. In the spring of 845, the ships reached the island city on the Seine, young Paris with its wooden bridges and stone churches. Charles the Bald gathered an army, but failed to bar their way. The Vikings broke his host, rode the tide, and stood beneath the walls. The city could be taken by blood, or spared for silver. The king chose time. 7,000 pounds of silver passed to the Northmen, and the heavy-laden ships glided downstream. A new word was born, Danegeld, harsh on Latin tongues. The rivers taught them more than silver's price. They taught the seasons of Frankish lands, when the Loire ran full, when summer drought shrank it to shoals, when to await the tide, when to linger. They turned islands into fortresses. Oléron on its sands became a camp harrying Rouen and Paris. The marshes of Noirmoutier at the Loire's mouth served as a base for raids inland. In 843, Nantes fell in the feast of St. John. Priests and townsfolk cut down at their altars. Terror was as great as in northern England, yet still the ships pressed farther. Angers, Tours, and Orléans felt the weight of longships. The Abbey of St. Martin at Tours, famed for pilgrimage, was plundered more than once. Monks fled with relics, hoping holy bones might outrun oars. On the lower Loire, Vikings sometimes fought each other for spoils. Trade was trade, but the wares were living men and cattle, and silver was the coin. Towns strong enough to resist learned to fortify bridges. Towns too weak learned to bargain.
Year by year, more Norse words entered the market speech of the valleys. Yet their path led beyond the Loire and Seine. They tried the Garonne and reached Bordeaux. They turned south and touched Iberian shores. In 844, a fleet sailed up the Guadalquivir and challenged the Emir of Seville. The fight was fierce. Fire ships and cavalry were grim foes. Many perished, but survivors slipped to sea with a lesson. Later, other war bands passed Gibraltar, striking the western Mediterranean. They hid in the Camargue marshes, rode up the Rhône, plundered Arles and Nimes, then pressed into Italy. Pisa paid them to depart. Luna was destroyed simply because its marble walls were mistaken for Rome. The kings of West Francia could not leave their rivers open. Charles the Bald and his counselors sought answers beyond ransom. They forbade trade of horses and weapons with the Northmen. They ordered bridges strengthened with towers and palisades, so fleets could not pass without battle. Counts were commanded to guard these crossings. The work was slow and costly, but necessary. Where a bridge stood strong, a fleet was halted. Where a garrison held a ford, a raid turned to siege. The answer was not only bridges and coin. There were men remembered for blood. Robert the Strong fought on the Loire and won fame before falling in battle in 866. His sons and grandsons would one day wear the crown of France. Great counts learned to gather mounted bands, swift enough to reach towns before foot levies could march. Priests preached repentance, counting donations to saints as shields against peril. Bishops hired mercenaries. It was an age of many sinners and many saints. The Vikings themselves were changing. If an island camp proved too convenient, it was fortified. A lean-to grew into a hall. A hall drew merchants and craftsmen. Behind the palisade rose a market. If a count with luck and a saint's favor struck swiftly, the camp burnt. If not, spring returned it stronger. Men took local wives or turned captives into concubines, and their children grew, speaking two tongues with ease. In the taverns along the lower Seine, foreign words now mingled with local songs, and the weights on the scales bore the marks of northern halls. The pressure upon the Frankish heartland did not ease. In the final quarter of the 9th century, Paris once again stood under siege. Before its walls stretched a sea of ships and warriors for long months. Yet the city had begun to learn endurance. New bridges and towers became its shield. while counts and kings argued, fought, and bargained beyond the ramparts. That tale belongs to another chapter. What matters here is the truth already clear by mid-century. A new order had taken root. The Northmen had learned the roads of the Franks, the prices of their markets, the seasons of their harvests, the cunning of their river wars. They were no longer guests. They had become part of the map itself. At the same time, their sails returned in dense clusters to English shores. Winter camps in Frankish lands had proven one lesson beyond doubt. A warband could feed itself upon enemy soil. That knowledge was soon carried across the narrow sea, where swift raids swelled into a struggle for whole kingdoms. Fleets now came not merely for plunder, but for the land itself. In 865, a great host crossed the water and landed upon the sandy shores of East Anglia. The chronicle calls them Mikkel here, the Great Army. This was no summer band of silver hunters, but a force that came to remain. At Thetford, they made terms on their own ground, took horses and supplies, and wintered upon the fertile fields, casting their gaze toward neighboring realms. The sagas and Latin annals preserve the names of their leaders, names that rang like thunder. Ivar the Boneless, Halfdan, Ubba. Soon another chief joined them, one whose name England remembered with dread, Guthrum. When the roads dried in spring, the army moved toward the rich Mercian plain. Northumbria lay torn by civil war. Osberth and Alla fought each other while the walls of York crumbled. On the first day of November 866, the Northmen stormed the city in a sudden strike and held it as their winter stronghold. In spring, the rival kings at last united and marched to reclaim it. The battle in York's narrow streets was savage. Blood darkened the stones, and both kings fell. The victors placed their own puppet upon the throne, counted the dead and the spoils. York had become a Norse fortress upon English soil. From York, the host surged like a tide into the valleys of Mercia. In 868, they reached Nottingham and raised defenses. King Bured called for aid, and the kings of Wessex, Aethelred and his younger brother Alfred, came with their armies. They stood bravely before the northern camp, yet no battle came. The Northmen knew how to wait. They accepted gifts and passed the winter by their fires. The West Saxons went home with a bitter lesson. The enemy chose ground and season as a hunter chooses his blind. In 869, the great host swept again into East Anglia. At Thetford, they built their base and turned against King Edmund. Later songs would hail him as martyr, but the plain truth was harder. He faced a power he could not overcome. By year-end, his kingdom lay beneath foreign rule. Soon, the coins of the land bore the names of northern kings, proof they came not only to plunder, but to reign.
The storm grew greater yet. In 871, another fleet arrived, the Great Summer Army. Battles in Wessex were fierce. The Northmen wintered at Reading, where the Thames and Kennet met, and sent strong warbands to harry the land. King Athelred and Alfred fought them again and again. At Ashdown, the English seized a hard-won victory, slaying a king named Bagsec and many jarls. But at Basing and Merton, they suffered defeats. In spring, Athelred died, and Alfred took the throne in dark days. Both sides, weary, at last made peace, a peace that was only a pause. The host moved like a river across the land. In 873, it wintered at Torksey, then at Repton, where Mercia was broken. Burhead fled, and in his place, the Northmen set up Ceolwulf, a puppet sworn to guard the west for them. The soil at Repton still holds their mark. Archaeologists have uncovered a vast fortified camp and a mass grave of hundreds. One great mound hid a chieftain and his slain companions. The chronicles did not lie. It was indeed a great army. By 874, the host divided. Halfdan led his men north into the valleys of Tyne and Wear, where he parceled out the land as farmland. Another band, under Guthrum, wintered in Cambridge before striking into Dorset. Alfred hemmed them in and forced oaths from them, but the Northmen slipped away by night. Their fleet, sailing to aid them, perished in a storm. In 877, Alfred trapped them again at Exeter. Hunger and shipwreck at last drove them to sue for peace. Mercia was carved in two. The west left to Ceolwulf, the east yielded to the Northmen, soon called by a new name, the Danelaw. Yet Guthrum did not abandon Wessex. In the winter of 878, he struck suddenly at Chippenham. Alfred barely escaped, hiding in the marshes of Somerset while gathering strength. Legend remembers him in a peasant's hut, burning cakes while lost in thought. But the truth was harder. He was preparing a counterstroke. At Easter, he raised his banner at Egbert's Stone and marched upon the foe. At Edington, the armies clashed. Shields locked, spears pierced, axes rose and fell. The Saxon line held, then drove forward. The Northmen broke, fled into a fortress, and endured 2 weeks of hunger before begging for peace. Guthrum and his captains accepted baptism, and Alfred himself stood as his godfather. That peace redrew the map. A frontier stretched along rivers and roads, dividing the land in two worlds. East lay under northern law, west under Alfred's crown. The king built burhs, strong fortified towns. He created a system of service so men could both farm and fight. He reformed coinage and law. Alfred had learned from the enemy patience and endurance and gave it back in strength. Meanwhile, the great army settled. In Nottingham, Derby, Leicester, Lincoln, and Stamford, new markets rose. Northumbria and East Anglia became homes for men who had once come with fire. Settlements, names, and customs changed, and peoples learned to live together. The Northmen turned to fields, but kept their swords near.
Then history brought forth the name of Rollo. The chronicles remember him as the man who turned ships into a ducal throne. He knew every bend of the Seine, exacted tolls, dictated terms to counts and kings. When the Franks weakened, he seized Rouen and its lands. In 911, after the battle at Chartres, he made treaty with King Charles the Simple at Sainte-Claire-sur-Epte. Rollo became ruler of Normandy, accepted baptism and the name Robert, while his followers were called Normans, men of the north. Their fields were here now. Their tongue became French. Their castles rose in stone. Their churches stood upon the ruins their fathers had burned. Out of iron and blood, a new people was born, carrying their fathers' courage into a new kingdom.
The birth of Normandy was a turning point in the chronicles of the age. A raider became a count, and the son of a count, the founder of dukes. The river that once carried longships heavy with plunder now bore barrels of wine, bales of wool, and the prayers of monks copying books beneath new roofs. The duchy stood with one foot in the world of northern memory and the other in the laws of the Franks. In centuries to come, a Duke of Rouen would gaze across the strait and see a crown awaiting his hand. But for now, the concerns were humbler, dividing fields, founding monasteries, watching enemies, raising a new people. If one left Norway in summer and steered a ship westward, the sea soon rose in long swells. The sun hung low and lingered, leaving only pale twilight for the night. Whales surfaced from the depths, rolled, and sank again into dark water. The nearer the land, the thicker grew the clouds of seabirds. First appeared a low coast, then black cliffs and mountains streaked with snow. On their oars, men caught the mingled scent of sulfur and salt and knew they had found the Fire Island, whispered of by traders in Ribe and Heideby. They named it Iceland. Rumors of distant isles had spread long before the first homestead. Tales spoke of Irish hermits, Papa, the Northmen called them, who prayed in silence there. But history, certain and steady, begins with a wave of settlers in the last third of the 9th century. Icelanders still cherish the story of Ingólfur Arnarsson, who built the first house at Reykjavik on a lonely shore beside hot springs and heaps of driftwood hurled up by winter storms. He was not the last. After him came the years of landnam, the taking of land. Families arrived in summer fleets and claimed valleys and coasts, as much as custom and strong hands allowed. The medieval Book of Settlements lists hundreds of names and lineages, speaking with pride, "This island belongs to men who remember who they are and whose blood they carry." Archaeology confirms that beginning. A layer of volcanic ash from the late 9th century lies like a seal across the turf. Beneath it, no hearths, no cattle bones. Above it, the first farms. The ash became a date written in fire. True settlement began soon after 870. The newcomers quickly learned what the land gave and what it denied. Iceland had no deep forests like Sweden, only birch groves and scrub. Sod they cut in vast slabs and stacked into thick walls that held warmth. Timber for roofs and ships came as a gift from the sea. Driftwood, borne on currents from distant northern shores, valued like treasure.
The chief wealth of Iceland was hay. Winters were long, grass withered early. Every meadow was cut, every riverside scythed, and the harvest stored in turf barns to feed stock through blizzards deep enough to swallow a horse. Sheep became the heart of every household. Cows gave milk, butter, and soft cheese in summer. Goats grazed where sheep could not. The small, sturdy Icelandic horse became the surest partner in work. Barley grew in gentle years, but bread never ruled the table. Men fished the coasts, dried cod white as spring beaches, hunted seals, and rejoiced when a whale washed ashore. Cliffs swarmed with birds. Their eggs and down were taken by those who, bound by ropes, lowered themselves from ledges with the cold detachment of necessity. Homes were low, doors turned from the harshest winds. A long room held the central fire with sleeping benches at the sides, woven blankets, and a pantry of stores. Smoke drifted through the turf roof, and in winter a haze lingered beneath the beams, filling lungs with the scent of peat and wool. Women spun and wove thick cloth, vadmal, which served not only as clothing, but also as currency. Iron was costly. Smiths smelted bog ore in small furnaces, forging nails and simple tools. The best swords and planks for ships were brought from abroad, paid for with wool, hides, and woven cloth. Yet families brought more than stock and tools. They brought their law. Iceland grew without a king. Power belonged to the Goðar, chieftains whose strength rested on followers, not titles. Every man could choose whom to support and change that choice. Each summer, neighbors met at local things, where disputes were judged, fines agreed, and peace restored. Blood feuds existed, but the law sought settlement. To kill outside of judgment meant exile and loss of rights. In 930, the islanders founded a common thing for all Iceland. They met at a great rift valley with a lake and a field of lava, naming it Thingvellir, the assembly plains. Each summer, temporary camps rose, and the law speaker recited the laws from memory. If a rule was uncertain, the Goðar debated until custom was born. 4 quarter courts heard cases, a 5th the hardest of all. It was a land of memory and witnesses, not parchment and seals, but the law held. The Althing became Europe's oldest parliament and the heart of Icelandic life. Beside the law lived the gods.
In farmhouses stood carved idols. Among the great, feasts were held in their honor. Thor was beloved of farmers, Freyr of harvests, Odin of poets and seekers. Sacrificial feasts bound gods and men together. Later Christian writers told of dark rites, but more often they were shared meals and oaths sworn under heaven's gaze. In time, a new faith arrived on the same ships that carried iron and wine. Missionaries preached at Thingvellir, and kings of Norway demanded conversion. Around the year 1000, the island stood near civil war. Christian and pagan families prepared for bloodshed. The choice was given to the law-speaker Thorgeir. He wrapped himself in his cloak, pondered for a day and night, and then declared, Iceland would accept Christianity as law, but private sacrifice in horseflesh might remain for a time if conscience required. It was a wise compromise. Peace was kept. Soon churches rose, priests learned Latin letters, and literature was born, gifting the world with sagas. The old gods did not vanish, they walked into tales and poems. Life depended less on gods or kings than on weather and labor. Men and women knew which meadows flooded, which springs never dried. They divided work at shearing and slaughter, arranged marriages that bound valleys together. Feasts were courts, news, and fellowship. Skalds sang, weighing honor and generosity. Iceland became a web of reputations, where the strongest thread was kin. Yet the island was not alone. Many settlers came by way of Orkney, Shetland, and the Hebrides, bringing their speech and ways. The blood of Iceland mixed Norse fathers with Celtic mothers. The language bore both, and even the land kept memory. The Westman Islands, Vestmannaeyjar, still carry the name Islands of the Western Men, meaning Celts. One saga tells how an Irish thrall woman led a revolt there and fled, but was hunted down. That tale holds both cruelty and kinship, and the meeting of worlds. Trade grew as surely as winter comes. By the 10th century, the island sent cloth abroad and received timber, iron, and grain. Each summer, ships from Norway came more often, and in time its kings sought to bind commerce and power to themselves. But that belongs to another age. In our century, Iceland was still new and stern. The sagas call it the Age of Settlement and the Age of Heroes. Yet the bones in the earth speak more of toil and thrift than of spears and blood. To the west, beyond Iceland's horizon, lay other lands, forests thicker than any here, shores told of in whispers. The first steps were taken by chance and exile. Among the settlers lived a red-bearded man with a heavy temper and the gift of leadership. His name was Eric the Red. Banished for killing, he gathered family and friends and led ships westward in search of new shores. He found coasts of ice and stone, yet fjords where meadows glowed green. For 3 summers he explored, twice wintering there. Then he returned to Iceland with a new name for that land. He called it Greenland, saying men would be eager to go if the land bore a fairer name. He was right. In 982, he led a colony and raised his hall at Brakalid. Others settled along the fjords in the eastern and western settlements. The farms were like those of Iceland, but harsher. Meadows were few, hay more precious than silver. To own cattle was honor, but sheep and goats saved lives. Hunting seals, birds, and caribou was a daily task, and walrus tusk was treasure. Europe paid dearly for ivory, carved into knife handles, chessmen, and church ornaments. A single ship of tusks could clear debts.
Greenland was no forgotten edge. By the 12th century, a bishop lived at Gardar. Stone churches stood in valleys, and the hall at Walsey still holds its walls today. There, in the 15th century, a wedding was celebrated, the last certain word of the Norse in Greenland. For centuries, life followed a fragile rhythm. ships from Iceland and Norway in summer, wool and hides and tusks sent back, homes built of stone and turf, driftwood patched into boats, every nail treasured. But life hung by a thread. One cold summer could spoil the hay, one iceberg block a harbor. Trade shifted, and walrus ivory lost its worth. Their neighbors were the Inuit, come from the ice. Masters of the hunt, they met Norsemen in barter and in battle. The sagas remember both faces, the trading partner and the foe, and the land bears witness in hearths and arrowheads. From Iceland and Greenland, the Western Ocean no longer seemed the world's edge, but a road. Hunters sailed after walruses and polar bears and returned with tales of new lands. These stories fired the imagination of Eric's son. His name was Leif. He was no loud hero, but a man of cautious courage, one who redrew maps. Hearing from the merchant Bjarni, lost in fog and glimpsing strange shores, Leif bought his ship, gathered a crew, and filled it with tools, nails, planks, and hope. They waited for the wind that would carry them beyond the known capes. The first land rose barren, strewn with stones, where foxes knew no fear. Leif called it Helgeland, land of flat stones, now thought to be Baffin Island. The next was forested, rich with straight timber. He named it Markland, land of woods, today's Labrador. At last, after days of sailing, they entered a bay of islands and meadows watered by a river. In the current, the water moved so thick with fish it seemed like the northern spring floods when salmon leap eagerly onto the hook. "The winters must be gentler here," someone remarked, watching how the grass along the banks kept its green even in the chill. The crew lowered their sail and let the river sweep them out into a lake that opened wide like the palm of a hand. They dragged their ship ashore, and for the first time in weeks, felt the firm, resilient earth beneath their boots. Here they raised houses from turf and timber, and on a small hill they built a forge. Leif named the place Leif's Booths. The old saga tells that one of his men, a southerner named Tyrker, wandered into the forest and returned with a bundle of wild grapes. From that moment, the land was called Vinland, the land of wine. Some scholars argue the word might have meant meadow rather than wine, and that the legend of grapes was embroidered later. But the meaning mattered less than the fact. They had found a country of deep forests, of rivers bursting with fish, and a winter far kinder than the iron frost of Greenland. The sagas give us more than names, they preserve the rhythm of a whole year. In autumn, men felled trees and loaded their ship's belly with boards and beams. They built a boathouse, a workshop where craftsmen could mend a hull or carve a new mast. In small furnaces, they smelted bog iron and forged nails for the journey home. On the plains, they hunted caribou, drying meat for the dark months. Along the southern shores, they gathered nuts no longer seen in Newfoundland today. Evidence, scholars later argued, that the Norse had pressed further into warmer valleys. The saga's tale found its echo in discovery. On the northern tip of Newfoundland, in the 20th century, fishermen pointed archaeologists to old foundations beneath the turf. There they uncovered 8 turf houses, a smithy with a block of slag, a boathouse strewn with shavings, scraps of timber and iron nails. In the soil, they found a bronze pin in the northern style, and a spindle whorl that once might have spun beneath the fingers of a woman while men carved beams. Quiet but clear, the evidence spoke. Sagas were not only poetry. Around the year 1000, a Norse camp had stood here long enough to leave iron and ash buried in the ground.
Leif returned safely home and earned the name the Lucky, for he brought back ship, crew, and treasure across unknown seas. But others followed. His brother Thorvald gathered a new band to explore further. Sailing eastward, they were repairing a broken yard when they came upon houses, clearly not of Norse making. Then figures appeared on the water, men in skin boats. The sagas call them skraelings, strangers described with wary respect. At first, there was no blood, but soon arrows began to fly. Thorvald was struck beneath the ribs and died on that very shore, gazing upon the headland he had come to love. They buried him beneath a simple marker and sailed away with the sorrowful news. Then came the merchant Thorfinn Karlsefni, who dared far more. He led 3 ships, over 100 souls, men and women with cattle and intent to settle. Their first winter was harsh. Hunger stalked them, and the sea sealed itself with ice. But when spring broke, they moved southward. The sagas speak of a place called Hope, with long sandy spits, shallows where whales beached, wild grain and grapes clinging to the trees. The locals came in skin boats, and at first peace held. Bright red cloth was traded for pelts. Yet one morning, a bull broke loose and bellowed in the dawn. The Skraelings, terrified by the roar, fled, only to return in force. Stones rained down, arrows whistled. The Norse formed a shield wall, shoulder to shoulder. And when men faltered, a woman named Freydis strode forward, shaming them into holding the line. Karlsefni saw the truth. A handful of people, cut off by sea and time, could not endure endless war. He packed his folk onto the ships and withdrew. These encounters were brief, yet costly. To the native tribes, the Norse were strangers, erecting houses on fishing grounds and paths along theirs. To the Norse, the land seemed rich, but each step demanded caution. Each dawn could bring an attack. Trade might have taken root, but did not. Wounds bled quicker than trust could grow. The headland camp was used more than once, but never for centuries. Its soil bears traces, but not layers of generations. It was a place with purpose, a yard for ship repair, a forge for iron, a station for hunting and stores. When the vessel was full of timber, fish, and dried meat, sails caught the wind and the prow turned back toward home. There waited black cliffs shaped like teeth, white islands thick with birds, and icebergs adrift in summer seas, signs that Greenland lay near. Why leave this western land to those who had lived here for ages? The answer was plain. There were too few hands. Greenland barely fed its farms. It could not spare men to guard villages an ocean away. Ships were scarce, and fog or ice could close the route for years. The goods they sought, timber, pelts, and fish, were precious, but not worth such peril, while walrus hunts nearer to home brought more silver. Vinland proved a land suited to visits, but too costly to hold. Yet memory lingered. For generations, Greenlanders spoke of Markland as the place to fetch timber. Hunters venturing far north brought back word of rivers and woods across the sea. In Iceland and Norway, skalds sang of Leif the Lucky and the new lands. Later scribes copied sagas, adding and altering lines. But when archaeologists matched those words to iron drawn from Newfoundland turf, the truth rang clear again. 5 centuries before others, the Norse had stepped onto American shores. They walked its beaches, ate its berries, fought its people, and returned to their own. On a quiet evening at Brattahlid, one can picture Leif seated on a bench outside his hall. The fjord gleams gold in the sunset. His clothes smell faintly of tar. A cup of ale rests in his hand. He sits in silence, listening to the tide slip along the rocks. When he speaks, he recites the markers of the voyage between Greenland and the Western land, as an old man might name the sons of his dearest friends. He knows the taste of warm southern winds, the bite of ice if you stray too far north. He knows the world is wider than the sagas, and that someday men will have strength enough to call it theirs.
The Baltic, though, was another sea entirely. Calm and fair weather, it smelled of pine and coldweed. In summer, its waters lay flat as hammered tin beneath long daylight. On its western shores rose the trading towns of the Swedes, Birka, then Sigtuna, where merchants gathered from Frisia and Ireland.
On the eastern coasts stretched long bays, sandy spits, and dark rivers leading deep inland. There lay wealth, furs, wax, honey, and people, to be captured and sold, for silver measured all things. Those who traveled these rivers were kin to the sea raiders of the north, but their hunger drew them not westward, but east and south. They were called Rus, perhaps from rowers, first along the Finnish coasts, then simply for any who came in long, pale boats. They rowed up the Neva, across Lake Ladoga, along the Volkhov to Holmgard, the future Novgorod. They wintered in Aldagjuborg, built ships, bought bread and women with Arab silver that had passed through 1,000 hands from sunlit cities far away. From there, the paths divided. One followed the Volga to the Bulgars and Khazars, to the Caspian Sea. Another traced the Dnieper southward, to the Black Sea and the walls of Constantinople. Where rivers failed, men dragged their boats across stone and reed. These portages bore names heavy as gravel on the tongue, and later a Byzantine emperor recorded them in detail, where to pull a vessel, from which bank to haul. Trade was as old as the first fire. The Rus carried sable, marten, fox, walrus hide thongs, amber, wax, honey, and slaves. In return, they took silver, gold, glass beads, silk, weapons, spices, wine. Proof lies in the soil of Scandinavia. Thousands of dirhams buried in hoards, coins cut and broken, for silver was weighed, not trusted by a caliph's stamp. Ingots, rings, shards of ornaments, another ledger written in rough metal. Slavs and Finns met them on the rivers. Sometimes they fought, more often they traded. Gradually, the Norse entrenched themselves above the river towns. The first tale of that land says the tribes expelled the Varangians, but quarreled and called them back to keep order. At their head came Rurik with his brothers and retinue. That was in 862. The tale is late, monastic, but the ground agrees. Forts stood at river bends, artifacts show foreign ways and mingling blood. Rurik died, and power passed to Oleg, guardian of the boy Igor. Cautious yet decisive, in 882 he sailed with his band down the Dnieper, seized the city on the steep bank, slew the princes Oskald and Deer, and nailed his shield to the gates. From then, the place was called Kiev. So, the axis of a new realm was set. From Kiev, tribute in furs and silver was gathered. The war bands marched as far as the city of the world, Constantinople. The sagas tell how Oleg brought hundreds of ships to the Golden Horn, mounted wheels beneath them, and threatened the walls by land. His shield upon the gates, his treaty with the emperor, memory turned into legend. Yet in Byzantine archives, treaties of 907 and 911 remain, detailing how the Rus should enter the harbor, how many days they might dwell in guest courts, what goods they could carry. No myth, but record. The empire needed the Rus, and the Rus needed the empire.
Much of this story was not forged in thunderous battles, but in the slower erosion of boundaries, through trade, through marriages, through customs that seeped quietly into daily life. A Norwegian captain might take a local bride, and their child would grow up whispering prayers in two tongues. A Slavic elder discovered it was wiser to pay tribute to the strong men on the river than to hire new, weaker guards each spring. Along the portages, men strained together to drag their boats, trading not only sweat, but also stories. And in winter, when the river froze hard, the water road transformed into a shining highway for sleds, where oars once cut through the summer current. The roads of empire were not only the stone-paved avenues that circled palaces. They were also the grooves of sled runners on ice, the deep ruts worn by carts,
the shaved slopes where men hauled vessels until the earth itself remembered their steps. By the turn of the millennium, Rus was already a power to be reckoned with. Their treaties were recognized in the halls of Byzantium. Their princes were known as far as Baghdad. Their capital looked both toward the endless steppe and the dark northern forests. The next step was inevitable. Their hardened warriors would march into the marble halls of Constantinople itself, not as conquerors, but as sworn guardians to the emperor. Thus began the strange and fateful path that would one day bring a young Norwegian, his purse heavy with gold and his mind restless with ambition, into the heart of the Queen of Cities. The city on the Bosporus gleamed like a prize at the end of every river road. Its walls shone white beneath the sun, its harbors choked with Latin sails and ships from 3 seas. The great palace rose above the water's edge, its golden halls echoing with footsteps. And there, beside the emperor himself, stood men with tall axes resting on their shoulders. These were the Varangians. The Greeks called them the axe-bearers. In their own tongues, they were simply men of the north. Warriors who had traded fjords and pine forests for marble courts and coffers that never ran dry. Their beginning as a corps can be traced to a bargain that bound 2 worlds together. In 988, Prince Vladimir of Kiev sought the hand of a Byzantine princess. Emperor Basil, beset by rebellion, hungered for seasoned fighters. Each got what he desired. Vladimir accepted baptism and the imperial bride, while Basil received a column of northern warriors. Thousands of towering men, hardened by long marches and close combat with spear and axe, swore loyalty to the emperor alone, not to shifting courtly factions. In return, they earned ringing coin, generous gifts, and the sacred right to stand nearest the throne on days when no other hand was trusted to bear steel.
Their trial came swiftly. In 989, Basil marched along the coast of Asia Minor to crush the rebel Bardus Phocas. The new guard moved with him. The rebel host was strong and confident, for it had already defeated imperial armies. But at the Battle of Abydos, their hopes collapsed. Phocas fell before the fight had truly begun, and the Varangians surged forward, splitting lines that had seemed impenetrable. When the dust settled, the rebellion lay broken. From then on, the Varangians were a constant presence in the capital. They guarded the doors of the throne room and the private chambers of the emperor. They watched over the treasury and the secret archives. They stood silent, axes in hand, at ceremonies in Hagia Sophia, while incense smoke and hymns filled the air. On campaign, they were both the last shield around the emperor in battle and the first wall of retreat when the lines faltered. Their commander bore the title Akoluthos, the one who walks beside, a name that spoke more of trust than of rank. Their pay came from the treasury, but their rewards were richer still. When an emperor died, the Varangians claimed an ancient right to seize whatever they could carry from his private chambers, a final gift for their loyalty. Scribes frowned, but the axe-bearers only smiled, clinging to their custom. They were famed above all for one weapon, the great 2-handed axe, with its ashwood haft and broad iron blade. With it they broke down doors, split shields, and shattered swords. Yet they also carried round shields, short swords, and daggers for the press of close combat. Many wore mail beneath silken tunics, a blend of northern strength and Byzantine finery, standing watch in golden halls. In time, the most seasoned earned titles, silk belts, and invitations to feasts where peacocks were served and foreign envoys bowed in awe of imperial ritual. Their campaigns reached far. Under Basil, they fought in the long war that ended with the crushing of Bulgaria. In 1014, when the emperor trapped the Bulgars in the narrow pass of Cladion, the day became a slaughter in the gorge. Chroniclers do not name the Varangians, but their axes and shields were surely there, darkened with blood in the rocky valleys. Later, they sailed with George Maniakes to Sicily, storming fortress after fortress until palace intrigue recalled their commander and the chance to redraw the map slipped away. They returned with wounds, with scars, and with tales of hot islands and strong wine.
It was then that among their captains rose a Norwegian exile who would become their most storied hero. Harald Sigurdsson, half-brother to King Olaf, had fought at Stiklestad in 1030, where Olaf fell to his own countrymen. A youth still, Harald escaped, fleeing through forests and marshes eastward to the court of Yaroslav in Novgorod and Kiev. There he gathered companions, learned the tongues of princes and traders, and in 1034 set out for Constantinople with letters of favor and a will that carved its own path. He rose swiftly. Greek sources mention a tall northerner under shifting names. The Icelandic sagas, with brighter ink, speak of his exploits, campaigns in Asia Minor and on the empire's eastern marches, sea battles in the Aegean and off the Syrian coast, a pilgrimage to the Holy Land. He fought again in Sicily, again on the Balkans. His silver was stored safely in Kiev, withdrawn when he needed to pay men or buy allies. The details differ, but the essence is clear. Harald served long, grew rich and seasoned, mastering both the camp and the palace. In 1042, during a palace coup, he found himself imprisoned. But in the chaos of revolt, the people and the guard shattered the prison doors. Harald emerged free, gathered his men, and boarded ships heavy with treasure. Across the Black Sea, he returned to Kiev, where he asked for the hand of Yaroslav's daughter. With her, he sailed back to Norway. In 1045, he shared the throne with his nephew Magnus. Within a year, he ruled alone. The axe-bearer had become a king. His last chapter would be written on English soil, at Stamford Bridge.
Yet the guard did not vanish with him. Each year, new recruits came from Rus and Scandinavia. After the Norman conquest of England, their numbers swelled with exiled Anglo-Saxon warriors seeking a place in Miklagard. Many were English now, but their oath remained unchanged. They stood in the halls as emperors rose and fell. At Manzikert in 1071, when Byzantine arms shattered before the horse archers of the Sultan, the Varangians held the standards and perished where they stood. Their loyalty to the emperor did not falter, even as the empire itself began to crumble. Traces of them remain still in Constantinople. In the gallery of Hagia Sophia, one can see runes scratched by a lonely hand. A certain Halfdan carved his name during a quiet hour of guard duty. Another mark spells Ari. These lines in the stone are whispers from men who longed for home. In the earth near the palace, archaeologists uncover axes and buckles of northern make. In Byzantine chronicles, one hears the echo of their boots striking marble floors. They kept their ways. They feasted loudly, lived by their own laws, punished any man who slept on watch. They were paid in gold, wine, and fine cloth. When the emperor rode from the Golden Gate, Varangians walked beside his stirrup. When he prayed in the great church, they lined the nave. When he hunted in the hills of Bithynia, they formed a ring of spears around him. They were present at coronations and usurpations, watching palaces looted by rebels and later by crusaders. Their final great day came in 1204, when Latin armies and Venetian ships broke through the walls. The Varangians fought on the sea walls and in the palace itself. Many fell among burning mosaics and shattered standards. After the sack, the empire's coffers grew thin, and the guard withered away. For 2 centuries, they had left their mark. The Varangians carried the glory of the north into the most refined court of the world. They wove the fury of Vikings into the fabric of Byzantine order, becoming part of the empire without losing their pride. Men like Harald proved that a sailor and a fighter could rise to be a captain, a noble, and even a king. And many others learned that the surest place for a warrior to stand was at the side of the one who needed a loyal hand.
Society in the north was like a tall ladder, each step with its own place. At the lowest rungs were the thralls, burdened with the hardest labor, often sleeping side by side with the livestock. Above them stood the free farmers, men and women who owned or rented their land, answering only to the law and to the agreements they themselves had sworn. Higher still were the jarls, masters of estates, who gathered followers into their halls with the promise of gifts and feasts. Yet this ladder was not fixed. A clever man of humble birth could climb high, while a careless noble could tumble into ruin through folly and pride. Fostering bound families together, weaving ties of loyalty that were as strong as blood. A young boy might be sent to the household of a friend or kinsman, there to learn law, manners, and the arts of war. A girl might be raised where she would be valued, taught the skills of womanhood, and prepared for an honorable marriage. From such exchanges grew friendships as enduring as kinship itself. Promises, too, carried great weight. A broken oath clung like a stain, remembered in song long after the man was gone. Women in these lands held more power than in many others. A wife might own property and keep the keys to her household. She could cast out a cruel husband by calling witnesses and sending him away with his belongings. When her man sailed to war, she managed the farm, counting coin and stores, overseeing fields and herds, spinning cloth and directing the household. On her breast gleamed brooches of wealth and taste. Oval clasps and strings of beads fastened her gown over a long tunic. At her belt hung a knife, her own tool, used without shame. Graves told the same story. Women were laid to rest with weapons, a woman with her jewels and keys. Sometimes a boat was set in the ground, covered with stones. Sometimes a simple wooden cross marked the grave. In both, love and memory worked the same. Health was a matter of chance and skill. Midwives knew the signs of safe birth and the dangers of hard labor. Herbs soothed fever and closed wounds. Bones were bound with splints and hope. People understood, even without scholars' words, that clean water, fresh air, and washed hands meant life. Combs against lice, tweezers and ear spoons in leather kits. Such small tools guarded against disease and showed respect to neighbors. Crafts bound the farm to the wider world. Weaving was a kingdom of its own. The loom with its hanging weights stood like the ribs of a ship, the weaver guiding the threads as a captain guides the sea. Spindles of stone or clay turned fleece into thread, spun by skilled hands. From that thread came vodmal, the thick cloth that served as garment and, when silver was scarce, as money. Iron, too, set the rhythm of life. A former who could mend and forge was welcome everywhere. Grindstones kept tools sharp. In forest pits, pine tar boiled into pitch for ships and roofs. Winter brought the making of ropes, rivets, and countless small things without which no voyage could be made. Children learned by standing beside their elders. A boy helped lambs to their feet and learned patience. A girl counted cheeses on the shelf and learned the year's rhythm. Older children carved runes into wood or bone when a teacher could be found. Runes were few, but they bore names, prayers, short messages. Later, Latin letters would replace them, but for now, they served well. Seasons themselves shaped life. Summer turned the sea into a road as boats fought wind and tide along the cliffs and fjords. In winter, rivers froze, becoming smooth paths for sleds.
Children skated on bones across frozen ponds. Hunters slid on skis through deep snow. Even the farthest farm was never cut off, for tidings traveled with sails, hooves, and men who loved to tell stories. Festivals crowned the year. Weddings filled halls with laughter and song. Funerals with grief and pride, as gifts sent the dead onward. At every gathering, gifts moved hand to hand. The Jarl gave silver and fine cloth. The farmer offered a summer's cheese or ale brewed from a whole field. Such gifts wove a web of obligation. Aid when rivers flooded or roofs collapsed under snow. Hospitality was a duty. The traveler always found a bed and a bowl of stew. Yet a guest who abused trust met a hard word and a pointed door.
Weapons stood near at hand, even in peaceful homes. A spear leaned against the post. A round shield hung ready to be seized in the dark. The sea axe, the short knife, was always at the belt. Tools doubled as weapons. Wolves threatened flocks, and men quarreled when ale loosed their tongues. Life was harsh, yet mercy had its place. Law cooled anger, custom bent pride. Out of such fields and halls grew the great expeditions. Men at the prow and women by the hearth were raised in the same habits: thrift, courage, memory, and a love of plain words. The world beyond the headland began in the smoke of a hearth and in the order of a stormy night. A ship that crossed the sea was born of the same patience as the woven cloth and the cheese cured on the shelf. The northern warrior was first a farmer, his hands hardened by work. Weapons lay nearby, because peace was uncertain. Shields gleamed with oil, spears rested by the door, small axes hung from belts. When the levy was called, he took his place in the line. The spear did most of the work, cheap, strong, and easily learned. Axes, common on the farm, turned deadly in war. Swords were rare and treasured, handed down through generations and clothed in legend. The oldest bore the rippling lines of pattern welding. Newer ones carried the marks of Rhineland smiths. The name Ulfbert was spoken like a blessing. Armor began with a thick wool tunic, able to blunt a blow. Mail belonged to the wealthy. Helmets were simple iron caps with a narrow nose guard, never horns. The art of battle lay in the shield wall. Men locking shields, feet braced, moving forward like a living hedge. Victory came not from reckless charges, but from a wall that would not break. When it did break, slaughter followed. Sagas spoke of berserkers, biting their shields and rushing madly into combat. Perhaps such men lived, but the rule was otherwise. Battle was toil, smoke, and mud, discipline and cold nerves. Behind the shield wall stood archers, sending arrows into faces and gaps. Stones from slings whistled through the air. And when the clash ended, there remained the groans of the wounded, the counting of spoils, and the reckoning of friends. Law followed war. Captives became slaves, ransom restored freedom. Oaths could halt bloodshed when both sides were weary of it. And above all stood the ships, the heart of it all. The long ship was a triumph of wood and iron. Its keel ran like a spine. Oak ribs rose like the bones of a fish. Overlapping planks, clenched with iron rivets and sealed with wool and tar, gave strength and flex to ride the sea. A single mast bore a square sail of wool, soaked with fat to repel spray. When the wind died, oars took the burden, their rhythm kept by song. With shallow draft, the ship slipped into rivers and skated off sandbanks. The steering oar hung to starboard, giving us steerboard, while the port side lay free for docking. Archaeology bears witness. At Oseberg, a noble woman was buried and a longship with carved animal heads, a cart and sleds. A display of pride as grand as any warrior's. At Gokstad, a broad, sleek vessel lay ready for open sea. At Skuldelev in Denmark, ships were sunk to block a fjord, their remains now in museums, a school of wood and iron for later eyes.
The old gods did not vanish in an instant. Their names lingered in feasting songs and winter sacrifices. Yet from the time of Harald, king of Denmark, who sought to stand as an equal among European rulers, the cross already appeared beside his seals. Norway came to the new faith by a harsher road. Merchants and rulers carried the word of Christ to its islands and coasts, and lesser chieftains accepted baptism to secure the favor of Saxon patrons. But the true turning point came with two men named Olaf. The first was Olaf Tryggvason, who returned to Norway in the final years of the 10th century. His will was felt from Alfjord to the northern shores. He founded the city of Trondheim, gathered craftsmen and priests to his court, and struck hard at jarls who clung to the old rites. He shattered idols in public, inspiring fear and enforcing a new power. His reign was brief. He fell in battle at Svolder when his enemies closed in against him, but the work he began did not end with his death. Some years later came Olaf Haraldsson, the one future generations would name Saint Olaf. With the aid of English bishops, he enforced Christian law, sending priests into valleys where Thor's hammer still hung above doorways and forcing the stubborn to choose between submission and exile. His zeal made him as many foes as allies. He died in the Battle of Stiklestad, struck down by an army drawn from across Norway. Yet after his death, tales of miracles and healing spread at his grave. Thus, a shrine rose in Trondheim, and future kings found in him a holy protector who sanctified their rule. Iceland chose a gentler way. Here there were no kings, only clan leaders. All disputes were judged at the Althing, where men gathered among lava fields and clear rivers. By the end of the 10th century, the island was divided. Some families already followed Christ, while others still kept the ancient feasts. Civil war seemed near. Then the law speaker, Thorgeir, lay beneath his cloak for a day and a night, and when he rose, he gave his judgment. Iceland would become Christian by law. Pagan rites were banned in public, though private sacrifices to the ancestors might endure for a time in silence and tradition. His wisdom spared the island from bloodshed. Soon churches rose on the very hills where sacrifices had once been made. Priests taught letters and literature was born, preserving the memory of the old gods and sagas, as in the Mass echoed within wooden halls. Sweden was last and most stubborn. The temple at Uppsala was rich and renowned. Foreign chroniclers claimed that every 9 years great sacrifices were held there, that kings and priests sat in a grove where trees bore dreadful fruit. However much is truth or rumor, the pull of the old ways held longest here. Olaf Skotkonung accepted baptism about the same time Iceland changed its law. In Sigtuna, he minted coins with the cross and Latin legends and gave lands for churches. His sons ruled in an age when the court wavered between priests and the men of Uppsala. Later, in the 11th century, kings fought openly over the matter. One, defending sacrifices, earned a name that clung to him like tar. Another destroyed the ancient temple and sealed Christian order in the country's heart. It was not pure, not swift, but the end was certain. The kingdom bent to the cross and faith became law. For a long time after, the North lived in mixed light. The cross and hammer still lay together on a peasant's chest, strung side by side for protection from any sky. Swedish runestones carried both crosses and prayers beside the old signs of kinship. On the stones of Yelling, beasts of ancient craft twisted around Latin words proclaiming the new order. Burials changed. No more ships burned, no more bones in ash. Men lay with heads to the west, with simple gifts or none at all. Yet the barrows still stood on the hills, and boys still ran over them asking their elders who lay within. What did the new faith bring beyond prayers? It brought books and the habit of writing. Laws once held in memory by the law speaker were inscribed on parchment. Charters bound land and oaths with ink as well as word. Priests taught boys to read and reckon. Kings used letters to levy taxes and send commands abroad without swords. Coins bore Latin legends and the faces of rulers. Towns raised stone churches that demanded decades of toil and patience. In Norway, craftsmen built wooden stave churches with steep roofs and carved portals where dragons and vines still whispered in old styles. In Denmark, stone churches dotted Jutland and the islands, each serving as both house of prayer and fortress in times of danger. In Sweden, timber and stone stood side by side until at last stone prevailed.
The Church bound the North into the life of Europe. Pilgrims walked new roads, Danish kings sent gifts to Rome. Norwegians and Swedes flocked to the shrine of St. Olaf at Nidaros. Monks brought quiet knowledge of herbs and letters. Later, archbishoprics at Lund and Nidaros gave the North its own seats within Rome's order. The calendar filled with feasts and fasts, blending old and new. Midwinter became Christmas. The first sheaf was offered to a Christian harvest. Spring opened with Easter, though peasants still looked to the same signs in their fields. The cross changed oaths and war. Kings no longer swore on heavy rings and high seats, but on books and relics. Feuds once splintered into dozens of skirmishes could now be judged by bishops' courts, measured in fines and penance. Slavery did not vanish overnight, but slowly ebbed. Markets shifted, priests fought against selling Christians overseas. Slave women still stood in markets for centuries, yet their children more often grew free, standing beside free men at the Thing. Ancient coronation rites vanished too, no more sacrifice of a horse. Now kings were anointed at altars, with holy oil in a bishop's hand. They wielded the cross as once the hammer, styling themselves protectors of the church, granting lands to bishops where they themselves wished to root power. They gave tithes and expected prayers for victory. Priests blessed fleets as once they blessed plows. The enemy was no longer only a rebel, but a breaker of Christ's peace. Thus raiding gave way to governance. Kingdoms that once burned monasteries in Francia now guarded monasteries at home and judged thieves beneath Christ's image. Yet the old culture did not die. It reshaped itself. Carvers etched beasts and knots on church doors and altars. Smiths forged chalices with the same hands that once wrought bridal jewelry. Poets praised saintly kings, setting the rhythm of battle to the measure of psalms. Runes lingered still, cut into wood and stone, though in time, Latin letters became the language of law and new history, born in Icelandic halls. That is why we hear the voice of this age in sagas. The same pen that wrote bishops' lives preserved the deeds of those who worshipped Thor. When the old gods withdrew, they left behind both dread and longing. Some called them proud and fierce, untamed. Others remembered feasts and stories, and the taste of horseflesh, now forbidden. Yet many saw the gain of new order, a calendar, written law, parish churches with bells, a web of learned men who spoke with kings of far lands. These were not only symbols but tools. The North entered European life, learning to speak in councils where once it had only struck with steel. The work of conversion walked hand in hand with state building. Harald Bluetooth bound his land with fortresses and bridges, his stones proclaiming the new faith. Olaf Tryggvason and Olaf Haraldsson carried church and crown into the deepest valleys. Olaf Skotkonung minted coins with cross and name. In Iceland, the wise word of a law speaker spared the island from ruin. Each deed bound faith and power together. When a bell rang in a new church, it rang also for the king who had paid its walls. By the mid-11th century, the cross had pushed the hammer from public life. Not everywhere, not at once, not without struggle, but the spirit of the age had shifted. Raids still came, but not as before. Kings now led fleets against other kings, not to burn temples in their own lands. Warriors bore crosses on shields and swords, blessed not in farmsteads, but in churches. The old gods moved into histories and sagas, carrying their pride within memory. The north did not grow gentle, but it grew ordered, and that startled neighbors who had long feared only sudden sails on the horizon. This order would shape the final acts of the age. A sainted king would become the heart of a shrine, drawing pilgrims. A Danish ruler would die defending the church's rights. A seasoned Norwegian would march toward a crown in England and meet his fate on foreign soil. And then, a duke from Normandy would cross the sea with the cross on his banner, though the salt and resin of the north still clung to his heart. The north now knew how to pray in stone halls and count with coin, yet there remained chieftains who thought the old way. None shine brighter than Harald Sigurdsson, called Hardrada, the Stern. He crossed half the world, served in marble Constantinople, bought his return with gold and guile, and claimed Norway's crown. He lived as if born for risk. In age as in youth, he loved a high stake. His gaze turned toward England. At the start of 1066, the death of Edward the Confessor opened 3 claims to one throne. Harald Godwinson was crowned with the blessing of the English Council. William of Normandy invoked a promise and Rome's support. Harald Hardrada pressed his rights through old treaties binding Danish and Norwegian kings to England's legacy. Above all treaties, Byrd his will to test fate. The fallen Earl of Northumbria, Tostig Godwinson, offered him both a path to landing and a grievance sharp as steel.
The old sea routes waited. Summer rang with axes in Norway. Harald gathered ships and warriors from fjords and farms, crossed the Skagerrak, won the Jarls of Orkney as allies, then steered for the Humber's mouth and up the river toward York. The English north rose with the levies of Mercia and Northumbria under 2 young earls, Edwin and Morcar. In late September, the shield walls clashed at Fulford Gate, on low ground cut by a stream near the city. The Norwegians pressed with heavy, seasoned ranks. The English line broke, driven into marsh and meadow. York lay open. Its people offered hostages and begged Harold for time. He camped by a narrow bridge over the Derwent, believing the hard part behind him. His ships lay upriver at Rickal, mail shirts on deck, spears resting on embankments. Horses grazed in the fields. The heat weighed strange upon northern men. On the morning of September 25, the English king fell upon them with a swiftness that legend would remember. Harald Godwinson had marched his men from London with such speed that the road itself became his ally. He caught the Norwegians off guard, basking in the sun, many without armor. Chronicles agree. The English vanguard struck the bridge first. One giant held the crossing with his axe until a spear from below brought him down. The shield walls closed, iron on iron, breathless and bitter. Harold faced the choice of caution or daring. He chose risk, riding without mail. An arrow found his throat. The host still fought under Tostig, but faltered. The second force from Rickal arrived with the banner Land Waster, yet could not turn the tide. By evening, the field belonged to the English. Of all the ships the Norwegians had brought, only a few dozen sufficed to carry the survivors home. The truth was cruel. Norway lost its king and England its strength on the very same day. 3 days later came tidings that turned victory to dust. William of Normandy had landed at Pevensey, while Harold bled at Stamford Bridge. The English king turned south at once. On October 14th, at Hastings, Shield Wall met cavalry. The English stood firm upon the ridge. The Normans fought with knights, archers, and footmen. Arrows fell like rain. Feigned retreats lured men into traps. By nightfall, the wall broke. Harold fell beside his banner and his brothers. The day was William's. Memory preserved both fields, the road to York and the hill of Sussex, as twin stones sealing the arch of an age. The blow that ended at Hastings had begun at Lindisfarne.
Between lay 2.5 centuries of raids, trade, laws, and crowns. The Duke of Normandy, who claimed England in the name of Christ, was heir to Rollo, once a raider on the Seine. His knights fought beneath holy banners, yet the will behind them had northern roots. The conquest achieved what the last Viking could not. England entered a new order, French in its courts, stone in its castles. Yet in York's alleys and London's lanes, the sharp, sturdy words of the North still rang. Across the sea, the lessons spread slower. Dublin and the towns raised by Norwegians in Ireland lived by markets, caught up in Irish wars. Yet Irish kings now ruled them with eyes on Europe. Orkney's jarls still launched ships toward Man and the coasts, but tied themselves more tightly to Norway and Scotland. The lords of the Hebrides had styled themselves sea kings, bargaining with one hand, swearing fealty with the other. Sea folk do not vanish. They change their terms.
By the dawn of the 12th century, the North had changed beyond recognition. In Denmark and Sweden, kings gathered tithes and summoned bishops to synods. In Norway, skalds sang of Saint Olaf, and the people began to understand. A throne stood firmer when upheld not by fear, but by law. The old ring-shaped things of Jutland fell silent, while stone churches rose along the ancient roads. In the markets, silver bracelets were no longer hacked apart to weigh a price. Now, coins passed from hand to hand, stamped with crosses and Latin names. In England, the Huskarls who once swung vast axes on Senlac Hill became heroes of tale and song, their memory reshaped by Normans to glorify their own valor. And far away in Constantinople, the Varangian Guard after Hastings welcomed more Englishmen than Northmen into its ranks, the final echo of a road first traced by Swedish longships along the waters of the Dnieper. Yet there were still late flickers of the old fire. Danish fleets came into the Humber, stood beside English rebels, and soon enough took silver before sailing home. Another fleet tried its fortune in the marshes, aiding those who knew every islet better than any admiral. But none of these ventures could overturn the new order. The age of swift sails and sudden fire had given way to the time of garrisons, mints, charters, and the slow, weighty patience of stone. Stand once more at Stamford Bridge by the river. The meadows reach out toward the narrow span. The autumn sky is pale and high. The mills of York hum softly in the distance. Those who fell there were the last of a lineage that had left its mark from Newfoundland to the Dnieper. Their deaths did not end the people themselves. Their children and kin lived on in Norway, Denmark, Sweden. Farmers, merchants, warriors in the halls of kings who spoke their tongue and honored their memory in churches and in law. But the old way of moving through the world had ended. Ships still sailed, but no longer with the same freedom. Swords still rang, but now beneath banners and seals. The longships were hauled ashore, left behind in legend. And yet much endured. Folk assemblies became parliaments. Norse names clung to towns and hills. The English tongue absorbed words that remain alive today. Sky, law, husband, wrong, take, give, they, them, their. Gifts from the North so deeply rooted that few paused to notice them. The old gods, too, did not vanish. They lingered in poetry, in carved wood, in the winter sagas, and the wind in the rigging still remembers them. The cry of a gull above the grey sea carries the same voice that once called men to the oars.
The echo of the Vikings lives on in the streets of York, where the endings by and gate still meet. In Ireland, the camps of ships grew into cities. Dublin, Waterford, Wexford, Limerick, and Cork rose from timber palisades and muddy quays into markets alive with coins and mingling tongues. In Scotland, on the Orkneys and Shetlands, Norsemen and Gaels sat together in halls, shared food and kinship, and forged a new coastal people. Across the Channel, ruin and Cain turned Norman strength into the foundation of new kingship. The name Northman became not just a nickname, but a title of a duchy, one that bestowed thrones. Europe shifted along the lines first drawn by the Northmen. In the west, the Normans, descendants of Rollo and his bargain at the Seine, mastered heavy cavalry and stone castles. They crossed to England with William and soon looked southward. Sons of their house took Sicily and southern Italy, raising courts where Greek, Arab, Latin, and Norse customs dwelled side by side. In the east, the paths opened by Swedes through forests and marshes gave rise to new realms. The Rus of Novgorod and Kiev took tribute from rivers, fought steppe nomads and emperors, signed treaties in the great city, and laid the foundations of states that would inherit their name. The word Rus became Russia and Ruthenia, born as a river name and now printed on maps across the world. Far to the north, Iceland preserved a different memory. There they built a republic without a king. The Althing at Thingvellir gathered people scattered across fjords and lava plains. Their habit of open speech and law bore a literature unlike any other. In dark halls where only a thread of winter light entered, scribes set sagas onto parchment. They wrote of men like Egil, poet in tongue, killer in hand, of wise women who ruled farms and fates, of ships and storms, kings and helmsmen. In another book, Snorri Sturluson gathered tales of gods in the Edda, so that later generations would know the names of Odin, Thor, and Freyja, and the fate of the world called Ragnarok. Ink on that island kept alive the voices of an age that had spoken once in iron and tar.
Laws and power shifted in that age, and in turn, they reshaped the people themselves. The Thing was already ancient when the first raids began, but under the weight of church and crown, it grew into a sharper tool of rule. In Denmark, ring forts and the long bridge at Jelling spoke of minds that loved order and straight lines. In England, Alfred's burghs turned markets into fortified hearts of towns, places where coins were struck and cities born. In Norway, the codes of Gulathing and Frostathing drew borders of land and measured the rights of kings. In Sweden, Sigtuna struck coins marked with the cross and the name of its ruler. Coins are silent until counted, but once weighed, they speak clearly. Here stands a power that promises peace. Trade wove a net that never fully broke. Hedebe's harbor sank into silt, but the path between Baltic and North Sea endured, later filled with the ships of the Hansa. Birka gave way to Sigtuna and newer towns, but amber, wax, and furs still flowed west, while wine and steel came east. Dirhams buried in Swedish fields still whisper of a silver tide once carried from the world of the caliphs. When Arab coin ran dry, Frankish and English money took its place. Yet the habit of weighing silver on tiny scales, of cutting bracelets to balance a measure, lingered even as kings stamped pennies with their own faces. Northern art did not vanish, it learned a new tongue. Carvers still coaxed beasts and coils from wood, but now upon church doors as once upon the prows of ships. The Jelling stones bear both the old carvings and the new faith. In Norway rose the stave churches, their steep roofs and carved portals where dragons wound themselves through vines of the gospel. In Sweden, runestones lined the roads, carved with crosses and prayers beside the names of the fallen. Latin letters claimed the laws and the chronicles, yet runes lived long in records and memorials. In Hagia Sophia itself, simple runes etched on marble railings keep the names of Varangians who once guarded a distant emperor's throne. Halfdan, who scratched his mark there, never knew he left a memory for 1,000 years. The longships became legend, yet their craft endured. Shipwrights still built in the same clinker style, overlapping planks that caught the sea true. The side oar gave way to the stern rudder, but the sense of wind and balance remained.
Knowledge of stars, birds, and currents passed from helmsman to helmsman. And now no one doubts the Northmen reached the shores of North America long before others. The camp at Newfoundland, with its forge, its slips for ships, its tools of wood and iron, speaks for itself. Here men felled trees, smelted ore, built a vessel, and sailed it east again.
Everyday life left its own traces, as telling as battles. In women's graves lie keys, the sign of property and authority. Combs and tweezers speak of care and order. Spindle whorls and loom weights remind us that cloth was as dear as silver. Stone weights show a mind trained to measure and reckon. Board games whisper of winter evenings filled with laughter and quiet rivalry. The great mounds of Uppsala and Gokstad tell of farewells fit for princes. Yet even the humblest graves, with a few simple gifts, tell of partings marked by love. The church entered the north, and the north reshaped the church. Parish bells ordered the days, feast and fast marked the years. Pilgrims walked to Nidaros, seeking the shrine of St. Olaf. Bishops quarreled with kings, and kings learned to wear their crowns not only by the will of the thing, but also by the grace of God. The old gods did not die. They lingered in memory, in songs, in the very names of the days, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Speak them, and you hear the whisper of a world that stood behind the Latin Mass. War itself changed. The shield wall, unbroken at Edington, yet shattered at Stamford Bridge, became the ordered ranks of mercenaries in royal halls. The axe of the Varangian turned into the axe of the English housecarl, and later into a memory sung of the Sussex field. Raider became guard, guard became vassal, vassal became officer, giving orders in silk to descendants of men who once followed a chieftain for silver from a hacked bracelet. The legend of the Vikings outlived their ships. Some painted them as devils with horns and blood on their lips, others as heroes of freedom with clear eyes and simple laws. The truth is greater. They were farmers, traders, seafarers, poets, smiths, carpenters, and yes, killers, all under one sky. They broke worlds apart and built new ones. Their greatest work was to bind Europe's far edges into one map. At the dawn of their age, a monk at Lindisfarne could live and die, never knowing the will of a king in Paris. By its close, the kings of Paris, London, and the northern courts watched one another and struck coins that meant the same in markets across Christendom. Stand now in a northern harbour at low tide and see the seamead shine like bronze. Hear the creak of rigging, the cry of gulls. The men who sailed from here left languages now spoken by millions, laws that still underlie parliaments, books that still breathe today. Their gods live on in stories. Their tools rest in museums or in the hands of craftsmen who still shape longships for harsh seas. Their halls are gone, but the habit of gathering, of speaking, of judging endures. They were not eternal. No people is. But they taught the coasts to listen for sails and rulers to listen for law.